remain a top-tier learning institution, which some refer to as a destination district. But to go beyond where we are today, to consider Lake Forest High School of tomorrow. In order to do that, we must continue to examine our systems, structures, and opportunities to ensure its students are prepared to be successful, world-shaping leaders. That is why we are returning to our facilities master planning that began in 2018 and simultaneously embarking on our Portrait of a Graduate vision process later this week. Both of these initiatives cannot happen in a vacuum. We must address them together as a community with you. I am exhilarated by the possibilities ahead for our district and our opportunity to create world-class learning spaces for our students and staff. Tonight we hit the restart button on that effort. We have about an hour together and we're going to cover a lot of ground. You will hear from our board president, Jennings, about the board's aspirations for this process. You will hear from Rick Young, representing district architect of record, Atkinson, about the past, present, and future of our master planning process. And we will convene a panel of stakeholders to discuss facilities planning in a post-pandemic world, with some time for community question and answer at the end. That's certainly a full agenda. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce District 115 Board of Education President, Mrs. Jennings. Jenny has dedicated countless hours to our community through this and many other service roles. She is a thoughtful, discerning, and tireless leader. I appreciate the knowledge that she brings about the district's past and her passion for what lies ahead. Please welcome District 115 Board of Education President, Jennings.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us. As Matt said, I am Jennings. In addition to my role as president of the District 115 Board of Education, I am also the proud parent of 3 graduates of Lake Forest High School. This is an exciting time for our community as we return to our work evaluating spaces that support our students, teachers, and staff at our Blue Ribbon Award recipient high school. This building is a treasured part of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, and Norwood communities, but it is now nearly 100 years old. Like a private home, it is in need of improvements that will enable us to continue providing the educational excellence that supports and prepares our students as they move on to post-secondary endeavors in today's world. The highlights of our facilities master plan journey that we will share tonight, and the district's architect Rick Young of Atkinson will, we began this work almost 3 years ago. A committee of teachers, administrators, Board of Education members, parent organization leaders, community members started the process of assessing our physical spaces, interviewing staff and students, touring neighboring districts that had created 21st century learning environments, strategizing big picture ideas based on feedback collected, and then hosting a community forum to gather input from stakeholders in March of 2020. Within a week of hearing from our community, the state shut down and COVID stopped our work in its tracks. Last fall, under the leadership of Dr. Montgomery, the Facilities Master Planning Committee reunited with the addition of many more staff and many more community members. We have held a number of productive meetings where we've looked at the ideas from 2020 through a new lens, asking ourselves what we have learned from educating our students throughout the pandemic and contemplating what we would do the same and what we would do differently. How have the lessons we've learned over the past 2 years changed how we meet the educational needs of all students today? And how have these experiences altered the direction of where we could and should be moving as we prepare to upgrade the education I would now like to introduce someone who has been with us on the facilities master plan journey every step of the way. Rick Young, Senior Project Manager at Atkinson. Atkinson is the district's architect of record, an integral resource for us, based on the firm's longstanding history with the district and its detailed and very technical knowledge of our building. Rick and his team continue to work with us to transform the evolving vision for learning in our school into spaces that make that learning possible. And with that, please welcome a great architect and a friend to our district, Rick Young.
Thank you, Jenny. That was very, very kind. I'm excited to be here tonight because to get the facility master plan up and going again after it took a hiatus due to the pandemic is very exciting. We've done a lot of great work. And so what I'm going to do tonight is go through a history and timeline of the efforts that happened prior to the pandemic, the original facility master plan process. And then activities that have happened since, bringing you up to date as to where we are now, and then also looking toward the projects that are going to start to be implemented this summer and then the upcoming summers. So the board originally approved the facility master plan process in November of 2018. We had our first kickoff meeting in December of 2018. And then from there, from that discussion, oversight committee was put together with a lot of different representatives. And we met first in February of 2019. And we had a total of 19 meetings all the way through May of 2020. In the spring and summer of 2019, we also, along with our associate engineers, took assessments of the buildings. So we did an educational assessment where we looked at the buildings and how well they are serving the district as a tool for the delivery of education. We also sent out student and staff surveys, asking them their opinions. You know, they're the ones that are here day in and day out. We had meetings with student groups as well as departments talking about the buildings and the needs and issues that they were facing. We also went with the oversight committee on peer institution tours to see what other recently renovated facilities look like in the area. And then from those surveys, we got gleaned certain themes. You know, things rose to the top. Issues about classroom size and its hindrance of what they could do in the classrooms. Lighting and the ability to control the lighting and the issues there. Temperature control was a huge issue for both students and staff. As well as, you know, the furniture being inflexible, toilet rooms being not renovated in an extremely long time and constant issues with those. As well as, you know, some spaces within the building not having access to natural daylight or a desire for more outdoor learning spaces and opportunities. So along with that educational assessment, we also did a physical assessment where we walked the building with our engineers and we looked at things like, you know, the exterior and interior construction, the building systems, the HVAC systems, electrical, plumbing, fire protection. We also looked at things in the classroom specific to acoustics, the furniture, as well as the technology, and assess things as far as energy efficiency. Along with the educational assessment, we were able to glean, you know, certain things about, you know, what we consider baseline things like temperature, indoor air quality, light levels, and acoustics. Things that are inherently going to hinder the educational process. So with all that information in hand, we started to develop options about how to address these issues. And we took those options and shared them with the joint leadership teams, as well as had additional department meetings to get additional feedback on those options. And these are some examples of what those options look like, where we address things like student services and the desire to congregate those into a single location so that students didn't have to travel all over the building to get services. Quite often they go from one student service to another. As well as renovating the science labs. Science labs are original to when they were originally constructed back in the 1980s. And so they're almost 40 years old. So obviously education has progressed a lot in that time, but those science labs have not been able to progress with those differences in curriculum delivery. Same for the typical classrooms. I mentioned classroom size being an issue, as well as technology. So upgrading the infrastructure to support things like collaboration and flexibility. For
for different teaching styles and different types of lessons that are taught in the classrooms of today. So in October of 2019, we gave a presentation to the board and updated them on the options and the feedback that we had gotten from the assessments, as well as we started to talk about prepping for presentation of this information to the community. And we planned and executed a community open house in March of 2020, which was a well-attended event, and I think was very successful. We got a lot of great feedback at that community open house. We had set up stations in the building, in the library, where we talked about preparing future-ready students, as well as this focus on typical classrooms, as well as ideas of collaboration and transparency. Enhanced specialized learning, where it focused on non-typical classrooms like science, PE, and the arts, as well as special education. And then supporting emotional well-being, and this focused on student support spaces, as well as student-faculty engagement and connectivity, student connectivity throughout the building. And then also modernizing infrastructure. As Jenny mentioned, this building is of an age where a lot of its infrastructure is getting to the end or well beyond its useful life. And so those systems need to be replaced. I mentioned the temperature control. A lot of the issues from the temperature control is just because the systems in place are not able to handle the flexibility needed to properly temper those spaces. And at each of those stations, and you saw examples out in the lobby, there was a series of boards, and they included issues that were discovered in the building, as well as detail about potential solutions. And at each of those stations, hosts from the Oversight Committee gave a short presentation overviewing what was on the boards, and then the community was invited to inspect the boards themselves and then give comments back. And we organized those comments into kind of this keep, stop, start sort of framework, where we wanted them to identify things that they really thought it was important to keep, as well as things that they felt that the district could stop and were no longer serving the district, as well as things that they would like to start, things that they would see like implemented, or any proposals that we had that it was like, yes, I think that's a good idea to start. Immediately after that meeting, as Jenny pointed out, COVID hit and everyone went home. Well, we didn't stop working. So we continued to take the feedback from the community, as well as the components that we had developed, and started developing project budget estimates associated with those components. And that happened in the spring of 2020. And then in April of 2020, we presented to the Board of Education our initial report. And that included a documents narrative saying, giving an overview of what was included. And there was an axonometric diagram that helped identify the different components within the master plan. So the master plan is a larger framework, a roadmap to the future. It's not meant to be all implemented at one time. So it's broken down into individual components that might be implemented in a sequence over time, and also identified any dependencies those components have on one another as far as their implementation. And then associated with those, we provided a project budget summary that was organized by those components. So you had a specific component within the master plan, and then you had a project budget cost associated with the master plan, as well as you'll see on the right-hand side, any dependencies or enabling projects for those components. Those components and those estimates were updated multiple times and presented to the board in May and October of 2020, as well as fall of 2021. This is an example of how that spreadsheet evolved, and this is a format that's been presented to the board multiple times and will continue to be presented in this format as far as prioritization of those components and where they fall in years to be implemented, or priorities as far as phase 1, phase 2, or future long-term needs. So as Jenny also mentioned, we re-engaged the Oversight Committee this fall. We met with a expanded group that included more teacher representation as well as student representation. And we met first in November of 2021, and then again in December, and again in January. We also did a follow-up on the educational assessment, specifically sending out additional student and staff surveys. We wanted to hear from the staff and students because it had been a year and a half since we had last presented to the community or talked with anyone about this. We wanted to hear if anything had changed. We asked them how the pandemic might have affected their views on certain aspects, as well as any additional comments. We had additional meetings with faculty and staff where we actually gleaned some additional insight. This is just an example of some of the feedback that we got. It wasn't wholesale, change the whole thing, but it was more nuanced. Tweak this, or here's an additional opportunity that you could consider. And so where we stand right now is we're looking at re-examining the prioritization of the facility master plan and then adjusting the associated project budget summary along with that. In addition to that, the district is continuing to invest in the facilities to the best of their ability. So the school board committed $15 million over the next 3 years to be spent to address some of the most serious infrastructure needs in the facilities, with the first stage of that being constructed this summer. And then from that larger spreadsheet, we've been working very closely with Pepper Construction, the district's construction manager, as well as Dan Mortensen, to dive into the details of what those overall summarized items are. Working with our engineers, visiting the facilities, identifying the detail that needs to happen in order to implement and address those needs. Because a master plan really identifies an overall need. It's flying at 30,000 feet, looking at the facility as a whole. Whereas once we get into actual design of a project, then we start talking about the details, about exactly the electrical needs that a particular unit needs to be replaced, or the sizing that might need to change for a unit. And that will continue to occur as more and more components of the master plan are implemented. When we start looking into classrooms, we're going to have additional discussions with faculty and staff about the exact needs for that classroom. That's not where we're at right now, but that's where we're heading once a project is decided to be implemented. And then from that, I believe we're moving on to the panel discussion. And I think Matt is going to step back up here and explain what's going to happen here.
So if you're on the panel, will you please approach the stage, please? Ago, I was on a panel, 2 panels actually, on the national level, and I was jealous of the moderator because I wasn't really in the hot seat, so that I get to ask the questions tonight instead of being charged with answering. So let's start first with the purpose of this conversation. We're going to spend, and I'm going to be very close to monitoring our time to make sure that we're honoring your time and honoring the panels as well. The purpose of the panel is to talk about how has the world changed post-pandemic. And it's a question that many of us are wrestling with, and how it impacts enterprise, and then how that impacts the educational setting through one way or another. And we're going to have a conversation that hopefully elicits thought about where we should go, or where we could go, or at the very minimum, things that we should be mindful of as we continue through this process of planning master facilities. Would you please take a moment and go down the line, introduce yourself and your role that you're serving.
John Noble. I'm a sitting board member for District 115. Board member, Director of Safety and Security for District 115.
Hi, good evening. Jeff Summey, Mathematics Instructional Director.
Hi, Erin. Am I on? Erin Leonard, proud principal, Lake Forest High School, Boy Scout, Speak Grays Lake. Woo!
Always hard to follow Erin. I'm Jennifer Hermes. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the high school and also the elementary district.
Hello, my name is Jennings. I'm the current student body president at Lake Forest High School.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Giuliano. I'm an educational technologist here at the high school.
I'm Susan.
I'm Suzanne Sands. I am the Leadership Council President for True North Educational Cooperative and as the Vice President of the District 67 School Board.
Good evening. Thank you. I am Leslie Fisher, Lake Forest High School alumni. I was also previously Board of Education District 67 and have worn various hats gladly in the district. Happy to be here.
And I'm Joanna Rolick, the Executive Director of the Lake Forest Lake Bluff Chamber of Commerce and the proud mother of 3 graduates and a daughter-in-law who also graduated.
And I'm still Rick Young, architect for the district.
Thank you for still being here. We're glad you're here. Thank you to the whole panel. A special shout out to Joey. Joey and I were at a stoplight this morning ahead of my 7:30 meeting and ahead of his school day, and we were talking with our windows on safely. The light is still red, but it was nice to see him and to visit with him on the highway. So let's take a moment and dive into the questions. First question. As we think about preparing our students for a post-pandemic world, I'd like to start by asking you, Joanna, about some of the shifts you are observing in the workplaces you see through your role with the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to bring that to everyone because it's a very interesting world out there. And I would tell you that when we look at shifts, I would say that the new normal is disruption. Disruption is the new normal out there. And what I have seen and what I marvel at are some of the characteristics of the people who have done such a fabulous job of A, keeping their businesses going, or keeping their entities, the nonprofits, so many of the institutions that we love, keeping them going through this, but also the qualities that have bubbled up to the surface as being necessary to deal with this kind of disruption. And forgive me my notes, but I didn't want to forget anything, because I'll tell you that the biggest shifts that we see are obviously geography of work, which is what it's called. The people that need to work in alternate locations, it's not necessarily where they have always worked. It has taken them away from the opportunity to be able to network or create a culture in their business. But also it means that they've had to be adaptable and be able to be flexible in the way that they do their work. So there's that. But the other thing is what I call the business toolbox. And I wrote down a few notes about this. These are the kinds of traits that I feel are not taught out of books, but these are the traits that are experiential or are shown to our students by example. And this is where I find what is happening here so exciting. But those kinds of things, elements are being resilient and creative, engaging abilities to assess, strategize, execute a means to a goal, to know the value of how to connect and collaborate, and to work effectively on a team. We at the Chamber are very, very happy right now to be partnering with Lake Forest High School and with the other schools in the area to help bring some opportunities to the students that we think will be real-world learning initiatives and experiences. There are 3 components in that I want to share with you, and again, the space makes a difference. Number 1 is we're here to offer assistance in training and interpersonal and business skills, interaction with business people and real-time mentors through internships and jobs, and third, the experience of multi-generational interaction, because there are as many as,
there are as many as 5 generations in the workplace right now, and that's something that's very, very important that students have the opportunity to experience, because everybody has a different way of facing work and facing the way they do things. Versatility is what I marvel at in the people that have been successful and the businesses that have been successful. And I would say that as I look at what you're proposing for the school year, this is exactly
All right. Is my microphone on again? Good. I can't tell if my voice is projecting, but first of all, I just want to address a couple of things. I feel like this is a question that has two different responses. There's the curricular aspect in what Joanna was speaking about, and the skills that we teach and how we foster those skills within our students. And that's a whole separate conversation that has to do with curriculum and instruction. But I'm just going to talk about the learning spaces right now. And I think that Rick did a great job of showing some examples that are already out there, showing examples from our classrooms too, of learning spaces that have an opportunity for students to independently learn, so move to the side quickly and easily, collaborate. The example of movable walls, where we can create larger collaboration spaces, is very important so that we can continue to offer opportunities for students to connect. Another big piece also is we really look at, when we look at the landscape now of the workplace environment, we look at the ability for people to be productively to work productively in a remote environment. And I think that that's interesting, and that's a twist and a turn from what we might have been thinking about 4 years ago. So how do we create opportunities to teach remote productivity within the school day and within the school environment? And again, I think it comes with just the spaces that are set up and designed, the smaller independent learning spaces, as well as spaces in which students can break off in the classroom too. Something that I really loved seeing were the collaboration spaces that were part of each department. I think that's important to have those smaller collaboration spaces, because we do have students who need extra time, extended time, access to resource centers, who maybe don't have the resources outside of school to pay for tutors, to pay for private tutoring. So to give them the opportunity to excel in academics by providing those smaller collaborative spaces next to the departments is also equally as important. And then finally, something that I see here as an area for improvement, and I think most of us in the building would nod our head and agree, would be just the technological infrastructure within our buildings, within our hallways, within our common spaces, to make sure that we're able to sustain whatever new technologies are coming at the warp speed that they're coming, so that our students do have practice in those environments as well. So not only many of the images that you had shown a minute ago, something as simple as the classroom furniture, easy to move, but also those smaller spaces for individual learning and the ability to easily transform a space from a large classroom to an even larger classroom with perhaps movable walls to small independent learning spaces.
Thanks, Aaron. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that question? Let's move to safety and security. Safety and security are always a priority at our school. Lane, as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, are you thinking any differently about the design of our spaces in the high school?
So that's a great question. The first thing I want to do is thank everybody for taking the time to come here tonight. This is very important to us here at the school as well as to the community. With regard to safety and security, there's no doubt that the last few years have been a real challenge for our district and many others. I've always stated when I came to Lake Forest High School that my goal was to make us a model safety and security program for other districts to emulate. And unfortunately, what we're seeing this year is school violence at levels we haven't seen since 1999. There's a lot of reasons and contributing factors as to why they think this is happening, but there's no doubt that residual and a loss of connectedness from the pandemic have contributed to some of these issues. So as we move forward with our plans for the future, I think that with regard to safety and security, we need to incorporate and be mindful of social and emotional health and how those impact the safety and security of our building. When students, you can make them safe, but unless they feel safe, they don't learn well. And so as we move through the process, we need to make sure that our students feel connected and that they belong to our community in addition to our school. And unfortunately, with safety and security, a lot of the times you only get one shot, because some of the designs and some of the improvements that you make are very significant, and it's difficult to go back and redo some of those large-scale changes that you make. So as we move forward, we'll have to take a look at the process before we build out and make sure that safety and security and emotional well-being are included in our master plan. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I am going to say, we have an important basketball game, and we're multitasking, so if Blaine and Aaron want to go travel to that game, this would be the time to fix it. Can we get that as a quick applause? There's a lot of things happening now, so here we go. Next question. Over the past 2 years, our students have experienced remote, hybrid, and in-person learning. In light of these shifts, have you observed our students using our learning spaces differently? If so, can you give us a couple of examples?
Thanks, Dr. Montgomery. I think that even before COVID-19, I feel like there's been a shift towards like more diversity in student learning opportunities. So whether that is like a self-paced activity, creating using a digital tool, alternative assessments, connecting and collaborating, like these are things that I think we've been trying to do here. And I feel like pandemic learning kind of helped move the needle in a way, or just kind of accelerated those things. So since we've been back, I can say that a lot that I've seen a lot of students gathering together to work on a screen. And whether that's in the classroom, I see a lot of students kind of gathering around one screen to do a project, or pushing desks together to collaborate on a project. Just today, and quite frequently, I see students out in the hallway a lot, kind of on the ground, lying on the ground, sitting on the ground, around a screen, doing a project, like on a computer. So I do see a lot of that. And on the flip side, I see students using screens individually, so they're oftentimes like in the zone, so to speak, so they have their AirPods or their earbuds in, and they're just looking for a cozy, quiet place to kind of focus and do their work, whether that's in the library, in a comfy corner in the classroom. These are things that I see daily. And even in the library, where we have like a sound studio, which has traditionally been used for students recording podcasts or videos, we've had a lot of requests this year for students to just use the room because, hey, I need to take a Zoom call, I need to work on this multimedia project, and we just kind of need a quiet space to do that. And we're more than happy to accommodate those requests. And those are oftentimes new requests. We haven't gotten the Zoom call requests until this school year, so that's an interesting one. So, I mean, I feel like what we're doing is kind of what we've always been doing in the past, and what we'll continue to do moving forward, which is just to provide students with flexibility in their physical environment and in their learning activities as we kind of push them to do greater things.
Thanks. Anyone else on the panel want to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, I would. Something from an instructional director's perspective, walking the halls and seeing students, Jimmy, you mentioned a lot of students being on increased use of screens. I think a lot of that is simply just they're collaborating more effectively, with Google Meets being something that's highly accessible and free and easy for students to set up. You see a lot of collaboration, trying to work together on assignments, trying to just communicate around long-term projects that I don't think we saw at the level or the frequency that we had prior to the pandemic. And I think that you absolutely were right in saying that the pandemic just accelerated our ability to sort of collaborate around the learning that we're engaging in.
Thanks, Jen. Next question. What makes a classroom or other space a great place to learn?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Montgomery. Wow, this mic is loud. Yes. I think the two most important factors for me in a learning space are probably adaptability and comfort. I think about a good learning space for me is a place where I can quickly go from a group of desks with my friends working on a project, as others have mentioned, and then go quickly from that to individualized private learning space where I can work on a personal assignment or a quiz alone without having to worry about others around me. And I think that's a big issue for kids right now, is being able to experience a lot of privacy, even sometimes in more cramped and smaller learning spaces. And I think that in this community we've tried to brainstorm ways to maximize our space, even in smaller environments. And then another thing is comfort. Students just can't learn if they're uncomfortable in their conditions, whether that be privacy or safety or temperature or lighting. I think a lot of times students sometimes walk in classrooms and it's too hot or too cold, and I think that's an issue that kind of needs to be worked on, as well as natural lighting. I think that windows are something that's super important in all types of classrooms. And just lighting from natural light is much better than just like downpouring spotlights in classes. And yeah, I think those are the two biggest things for me. It's comfort and adaptability, be able to use technology to aid our learning and escape the lecture format. I think that students like to learn the curriculum more often when they're working with like physical models or with screens instead of just watching the lecture and taking notes. And I think that by having increased comfort and adaptability, we can get through the curriculum more quickly and efficiently and just learn better as classmates and students.
I think you agree that there is a place for lecture.
Yeah, for sure. Just not all lecture.
I do like how your adaptability built on Jennings' flexibility and the ability to transform learning spaces to meet many needs is paramount as we transition into schools of tomorrow. Anyone else want to weigh in on what makes the classroom or the space a great place to learn? Okay, next question. Where in the current building do you feel most inspired or most able to meet your students' needs, and why? What can students do in those spaces versus other spaces?
Dr. Montgomery, thanks for that question. In preparing a concise, succinct answer for this, I definitely checked with lots of folks. And the overarching response that I felt like I got from people sort of got divided into two buckets, if you will. One was sort of an emotional response, and another one was sort of a practical response. And I feel like the practical has sort of already been well established by Jimmy and Joey's answers of flexible spaces, adaptable spaces. The only caveat I would add to that, or additional piece that I would add to that, is a lot of it related to furniture. And so the spaces that they felt that really inspired with them were the ones that could be quickly changed. And so I think that sort of refers to the flexibility and the adaptability. But then also, just simple features like outside the math classroom or math collaboration space in the math department, there's whiteboard desks. So a simple feature like that allows increased collaboration amongst a teacher and a student to communicate mathematically, to where you can do that, and you can do that effectively and quickly. Other spaces that kind of more fell into that emotional realm were spaces that were described as open or striking. So for instance, our library, a lot of students felt very stimulated in that space, very comfortable in that space. The field house, a wellness ID referring to the largeness or the openness of those spaces, allowed for students to engage in varied activities so that they could connect with one another in ways that maybe they couldn't in spaces if they felt like they were too small. So lots of spaces were named. For instance, our business incubator classroom, the fact that they have comfortable furniture in there, but also allow for students to connect in projects, but then also switch quickly to work at an individual level. Those kind of describe some of those two categories that I was trying to name for you earlier.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else want to weigh in on?
Yeah, I guess I will add on to that. I guess that's another space that I didn't really mention was the Humanities Resource Center, which is kind of one of the really unique rooms. I don't know if you've ever been there in your school, but basically it's like a classically themed room. I think that's how I describe it, with like a lot of windows and natural lighting. And I don't even know if it has any actual like real lights from the ceiling, just more like lamps and other stuff. And I think that just like natural light is a recurring theme for students, just like having the ability to learn and like look at their papers and talk to their classmates without like large white lights and them. So I just think that that's what I would add to good spaces for students to learn.
Thanks, sir. Anyone else? Next question. As we think about our school as a place for all students, we know that learning spaces are not one size fits all. How should the differences among our learners influence the way we are thinking about our learning spaces?
So I will take this one first, and what I would say is I'm thrilled at all the other answers that I've heard today because they align with my thinking about this question. First of all, I think that research shows us, and that I've learned through my role in True North again and again, that a learning community works best when all of the learners have ample time to do their learning together and with one another. And if we sort students and specialize spaces for particular people or learners, that's not necessarily helpful. But if we design specialized spaces to meet curricular needs, to meet skills that we're trying to teach, to replicate professional environments that are the future of whatever the discipline is, and at the same time build in the adaptability and flexibility to meet the needs of all learners in all spaces, so that wherever our learners go, whatever they want to engage with, because this school offers really such an amazing array of learning opportunities for our students. Back to Joanna's, like the hands-on and the real life and the book learning, if you will. It's all here for the taking. And I think what's important is we have an opportunity to make sure that every space in the building has enough flexibility and adaptability in it, so that whatever learners walk in the door and want to access those opportunities, we have spaces that are able to be adapted for the learners that show up. And our learning community changes all the time. Best practices in education change. The demands of the working world are going to continue to evolve and change. The needs of our community are going to continue to change, and in order for this to be a sustainable thing where we don't need to be revisiting all the time, we want to just focus on that idea of flexibility and adaptability, I think, and then we're golden. And we have a sustainable environment where our teachers can be responsive to the needs of their learners, they can be responsive to the changes in the curriculum that they want to make, and they can do those things in the spaces that we've provided. And I think the points about furniture and lighting are a huge part of that in terms of what you have access to.
It's a very interesting question because we really need to examine, the idea of historical spaces and the idea of innovative spaces. Because I think a lot of people, when they think about historical spaces, they're thinking of a particular aesthetic, the feeling that you have in that space. And when you talk about innovative spaces, really we're not talking necessarily about an aesthetic. We're talking about how the space functions, how it serves its purpose. So the reality is those two concepts are not in conflict with each other. You can provide a historically aesthetic, pleasing, and feeling to a space, but still accommodate all the flexibility and adaptability
for that space to serve innovative curriculum. So the reality is we need to have conversations about what makes Lake Forest spaces unique. What is it in the detail? What is it in the materiality that gives it its real sense of place? And then we need to have a side-by-side conversation with how does the curriculum want to be delivered to the students? What are we trying to get across? How can we maximize the flexibility of that space to adapt to the changing of that curriculum over time? Because the one thing we know is that things will change, things will evolve. And the best thing we can do is create spaces that can most easily adapt with those changes and accommodate any advances in curriculum that we as a
both. I know we can do both, and we can do it well at the same time. I know this because we have an administration who believes and knows that we can and is committed to doing so, just as we see the community is here tonight. I also know from working with Perkins and Will in the past, back in District 67, already in Lake Forest High School, they have made enhancements, they have made updates to our building and maintained the character and the rich history of these buildings. That is a great source of comfort. Speaking a little bit about the post-pandemic lens that we look through, I defer to my parent hat. I, like many of you, during that period of time, had 3 high school and college-age children who were no longer able to be in the classroom. And now that we know, at the time back in March of 2020, everyone was caught off guard. Businesses, schools alike, everyone was caught off guard. And there was a reason to be caught off guard. Now, for better or worse, we know better. So we need to prepare better, and we need to prepare and know the value. We see the value in in-person learning. We have to do our best to make those classrooms remain open if anything like this should happen again. Finally, on a note, through my educated lens, when we talk sometimes about learning spaces, some people may find it's frivolous, these are the bells and whistles. I can tell you firsthand from my experience in classrooms that if what we're trying to do here, and I know that we are, is we are trying to create 21st century learners who are thriving, we need to have spaces for them to be able to thrive in. So when they leave here, whether it's for a 4-year university or college, or the military, or a trade school, or a vocation, they hit the ground running in those collaborative, engaging environments that they were prepared for here at their school. We owe it to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Anyone else want to weigh in on this question? Okay, we're almost out of time. Before we wrap up and move to audience questions, I'd like to direct the last question to our board member, John Noble, who has been on this facility master planning journey since the start. John, following this incredibly rich conversation, will you share with us why you believe this process is so important for the future of Lake Forest High School?
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks, everyone. Graduate of Lake Forest High School, so grew up mainly here, and we've got 3 daughters, a sophomore in college, freshman here at the high school, and a 4th grader. So to start with my 4th grader and the idea, and this happened just literally the other day, and I say this all the time, it's trying to allow the kids to find their passion. So she was at a badminton lesson, and someone asked me, how did she do? And I said, well, today she changed from a witness to a participant. And the idea of basically having kids that effectively are walking their way through and witnessing whatever they're doing and learning whatever they're learning, and being able to become an active participant. And really changing that dynamic and what's the trigger that allows that to happen. And that's different for everybody, and it's different for everybody when it happens. And when we think about what we're trying to do here and what we need to do here, I get back to strategic planning and strategic thinking all the time, and I think Matt knows that from my first days on the board to his first days here. You can't cost cut your way to growth. It doesn't work. You have to invest. And you have choices and you have constraints about how you can invest and what choices you can make to invest. And I think that's what we're doing here and with the community and understanding what those choices should be. But I do need to applaud so many of the people up here that have been part of the conversations, the idea of what architects bringing that vision and opening up the ideas and the doors for us to go through and really explore those things, as well as what we're hearing from the kids in terms of what they're seeing directly, but at the same time leading them into the new opportunities for us. So this is something critical to do. It's critical for everybody to do all the time, but very oftenly what we find is we get in our own way because we get operationally focused and we forget to strategic plan. We forget to put the priorities out. And so a couple things, I'm chair of the Finance and Ops Committee, and so one of the things we did, I think that we talked about is we put together at least an initial $15 million for the next 3 years to cover what we can do. And I think we've got the leadership and the team, and I'm so blessed that Dan's now part of our team with Matt and everybody else is helping prioritize what we can do while we continue to discover and go through the discussion and understand where those priorities need to be. And one of the last things I'll say is that our business is people. So the staff is immensely critical. We cannot do any of this without them. And so giving them the tools, because that's really what all this is. This is all technology and tools. This is just simply enablement. The execution happens between the teacher and the child. And so how do we create the better opportunities? And if we can do that and give them what they need and the flexibility that they need, and transition these children into discovering their passion from being witnesses to participants. So that's where I would kind of leave it. But that's why we have to do it and why we should do it. And we'll figure out what level we can do it.
Thank you, sir. I love the idea of witness versus participant. It was wonderfully done. And I also like cost cut. We can't cost cut our way to growth. I think those are two powerful statements that I took away from that. At this time, could we have a round of applause for our participants on the panel? And I'm going to ask you to stay there. We're a little over, but I would like now to open up the floor for questions. If you do have a question, I'm going to ask you to come all the way down to the front to the microphone. And I apologize for making you do that, but there are people watching live stream, and I want them to be able to hear the questions and the answers. Apologize again.
Hello, I'm Kelly, and I have a Sheridan 4th grader and a DPM Suzanne. Thank you so much for everything. My question, I guess, might be to you and the architect. Will you be investing in new elevators to make it easier for kids to get around the building?
I can't say specifically whether we're necessarily investing in new elevators. I do know that we are, within the master plan, looking at renovating the core up through the building. The newest elevator on the 2007 edition, is remaining in place. The existing elevator that is in that core is within a component of the master plan. Now, whether or not that particular component, as we start to re-examine the prioritization of the components of the master plan, ends up being within a first phase, it's executable, I can't say. But it is within that component. So if that one were to be executed, in all likelihood, that elevator would be replaced.
Thank you.
Sir?
Paul Heyman, a question regarding the $15 million, as far as how much of that would be going for the HVAC?
So of that, I can't say the exact figure just because I don't have all of them memorized. I do know that we do have a significant amount of infrastructure equipment being replaced, and some of the is allocated to HVAC equipment. I simply don't recall the exact figure that's included.
50%, 25%?
No. The amount of infrastructure improvements that are needed at the high school overall within the master plan is millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. So a large portion of the priorities that were identified are infrastructure improvements, are simple basic needs of lighting and acoustics and HVAC and plumbing that have to be upgraded. I would say within the 15 million, there are several million associated with that, but that's, to be perfectly honest, is scratching the surface at the amount of infrastructure improvements that really need to happen at this facility.
Because there are no one else up here as far as, I'm just want to be sure that at the end of 3 years, and we look back as far as the 15 million, could you break down more as far as what we should expect to see as far as in 3 years, as far as, I have no problem spending 15 million on the HVAC and the plumbing, because those are all things that over 20, 30 years will need to be replaced. They aren't glamorous things as far as saying, hey, it's a new atrium or a new dining cafeteria. So I have no problem spending the 15 million on the HVAC, just as long as we know that we are attacking the rooms that have the most problem with the cooling. Because if you've got 50 classrooms, you're always going to find 3 or 4 that are going to be at the end of the duct run that really need to be incorporated, so that we know that if some rooms go up to 83, 84 degrees in the summer, that we are addressing those first, so that we know that in general we've been able to achieve some of the most important things. So that's what I'm hoping that I can hear from you.
Yeah, so in speaking to that, within the 15 million, our intention is to address those items that are in the most need of replacement, those items that are the furthest beyond their useful life, those that are most likely to potentially fail and have to be replaced in an emergency situation where you're inherently going to spend more to replace it if you have to do it in an emergency. So we're working very closely with Dan Mortensen, the Director of Buildings and Grounds, as well as the facilities directors within the facility, as well as our engineers who have done assessments of the facility to identify the age of all the equipment throughout the building, and then also working with Pepper Construction to work on things like availability and lead times. Right now we're experiencing very bizarre fluctuations in the marketplace as far as lead times are concerned. I will say in this first summer, we aren't addressing mechanical equipment because the lead times on them are simply too far out to actually address those. So you will actually see HVAC and mechanical replacements happening in years 2 and 3. But beyond that, it's really those that are in most danger of failing are how we're prioritizing this first 15 million. And that's kind of our barometer. And the facilities directors, there are life expectancies associated with mechanical equipment. But then the maintenance of those pieces of equipment, and also just, occasionally things fail sooner or last longer. It's really talking with the people who are interacting with that equipment on a day-to-day basis, talking with the facilities directors about how much they're having to spend on maintenance, because that's a key indicator of how soon a piece of equipment might fail. So it's really having those conversations in order to identify the piece of equipment that are specifically going to have to be replaced.
And I will tell you just a moment about lead times. We're getting some lead times upwards of 52 weeks at this point. The construction world and the supply and demand is in such flux that we are pivoting our priority list real time as we are determining what lead times we're hearing back from suppliers. Any other questions?
One
Go for it.
Last question. You had that matrix that you've been working on. Just out of curiosity, does it come out to like 45 million so that the 15 is 1/3, or just so that we aren't shocked as far as where are we with the 15 and the total potential that it could be over 6-7 years?
Honestly, I can't give you that figure because I don't recall the total off the top of my head. Okay. Also, all of that wouldn't be, I have not encountered a school district that has ever implemented the entirety of a master plan. Exactly. It's really talking about what are the priorities and what does this particular community or any particular community have an appetite for addressing, you know, whether or not they agree with the level of the priorities. Okay. I will say that that spreadsheet is presented to the board and updated at regular intervals, as I mentioned in my presentation. And it will be updated yet again based on all the feedback we've received from this reinitiation or re-engagement.
Thank you very much.
And I think it's going to be paramount that we are talking to our stakeholders to figure out, you know, if there is, I'm going to say 50 million that we want to do, or 100 million, what are those priorities, and then what would the community support, and then create a plan backwards from there, because I think there's an opportunity to do as much as we want, but that's not fiscally smart. It's what is the appetite of the community, how do you create a plan around that appetite, and how do you prioritize it accordingly, so whenever you do go to referendum, you have a package that the majority of the voters can support because they have been engaged in the process every step of the way, and we're very calculated in what we're coming together and presenting to all of you.
Dr. Montgomery, can I add one more comment to my previous answer based on the question from Kelly earlier? I would say, and I would just, it was an underlying assumption of mine that we would do this, but I just want to put it out there and articulate it explicitly, that I would hope that given an opportunity to remodel, restructure various parts of the building, that we would always have at top of mind maximizing accessibility and making improvements that don't just meet what we're required to meet, but that go beyond and look forward to what is the accessibility, what are the potential accessibility needs of the future, so that we don't find ourselves creating spaces that create obstacles or barriers for any of the learners who may enter our building in the future, or any of the community members, or any of the teachers, or any of the staff. Like, I just think we need that to be top of mind as well when we're looking at final designs and things like that.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Suzanne. Any other questions? We got two coming simultaneously. It's a race.
Good evening. I'm Susan Atkinson, and I am a proud alum of Lake Forest High School. I live. I also have had 4 children go through the building. They are proud alums, and actually my parents are also alums of the building. So we've been through a lot of renovations from a student's perspective. When I was here, we started out West Campus, and also from a parent's perspective, we were here at the last renovation with the referendum. So one thing that usually gets lost in all the renovations is the historic integrity of the building, and so I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Currently, I am the president of the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation, and our members are really concerned about the historic and architectural integrity of the building. So I have a couple of questions about that. I'm just wondering, how are you going to ensure the architectural integrity of the original building? Because the last couple of renovations, especially the addition in the commons area, was really an incompatible addition to this historic building. That's really important to community members and alums. We hear about that a lot, about the historic part of the building. A lot of exterior and interior original parts of the building were removed and nowhere to be found, and they're really significant. So just wondering, how are you going to ensure the architectural and historic significance of the building? And also, do you plan on going through the City of Lake Forest review process with boards and commissions, because that allows the public to have a view into your plans and also to comment on that?
Okay, we had multiple questions in there. So as far as, I'm going to address the last one first, as far as going through the review process with the city. I can't say whether or not we specifically are, because that's a discussion that has to be had with the district in mind as well. I do know that the original building is an actual historic registered facade. So working on that, we would we would likely be consulting with the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency at the very least, as well as quite often working on other historic projects. We always like to engage with the local historic preservation community to get their opinions on how things are being addressed. We don't want to create any conflict with how those things are addressed. So I do know that within the master plan, one example is replacement of the windows on the original building. They're all original to it, they're all single pane glass, and we want to have very detailed discussion about options there. There have been already discussions on it as to whether to restore the windows, whether to replace them in kind, because they have very serious issues as far as thermal breaches to the building, which are causing the district ongoing maintenance and energy and money. So we want to have those discussions, and we want to pull in as many voices as possible, and then come to a solution that is agreeable to all involved. As far as preserving the interior historic nature of the building, the public room was mentioned as one example. Currently in the master plan, there's no identified need to renovate the public room space, other than possibly, as far as, again, infrastructure, perhaps replacing the lighting or addressing things like that. But things of that nature, or like the main hallway, has a lot of great detailing in it. And we definitely want to preserve that detailing. We definitely want to preserve the look and feel of the building, while simultaneously addressing the actual issues that are impeding, as I've said, the innovative curriculum. So it's going to be a balancing act, and it's going to be a lot of back and forth and a lot of discussion to come at that agreeable solution, as you mentioned, to help balance the needs of the curriculum and the historic nature of the building.
Okay, we would love to work with you. I know Marcy Kerr is sitting on the panel, who's our executive director, but we offered to work with you on the historic and architectural features of the building, and really encourage you to go through the city process too. That opens it up to the public in a wider view, and we didn't do that the last time, and I think that's where some of the problems came with the incompatible addition. So thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you.
Go ahead. I have a question with several sub-questions too, I guess. So first of all, what you said, Joey, really resonated with me. So I actually grew up in Germany, and I think especially the points you made about how learning relates to adaptability and individual comfort really resonated with me. So my high school in the 1980s, 1990s, actually had a 5,000 square foot common area that was shaped like rolling hills, carpeted with fountains and plants. And so you could sit in groups, sit by yourself. It was very comfortable. It was a great area for kids just to hang out socially or work on academic things. And so I get that point of wanting to be comfortable in your learning space. So I think that's a really important point. Thank you for being here and offering the opportunity to ask questions. I guess I lost a little bit track of where we're at. So I really appreciate the considerations of the post-pandemic landscape and where we are at and how things have changed. Now, I know the master plan is now, I guess, 3 years old, so every single point that was made by the panel was very well made. I guess I'm just wondering, how is that going to affect, or is this going to affect the master plan? And I think that's where I kind of lost track. Is that something that is going to be put in the master plan? Is that going to expand certain considerations? I guess that was one of the questions. I appreciated the previous owner talking about numbers. I do seem to remember, I think I saw 31 million on some of the spreadsheets there. So I guess that consideration, I think, for the community is a big consideration, how over several years that is going to be financed. I guess from a layperson's point of view, my question would be, if you look at your experience with other high school remodeling activities, New Tree or Stevenson comes to my mind, and I don't know if that answer can be answered, if that question can be answered in a simple way, but for how many years is this good for, quote unquote? We talk a lot about the 21st century learning, which to me almost seems outdated. I was excited about that terminology in 2001. I'm less excited about it in 2021. But I guess my question is just, I understand the mechanicals or HVAC, plumbing, temperature, all of those things. But if we invest, let's say, 45 to 50 million over, I don't know what the projected timeline might be, for how long is that good for? And again, that's very much a layperson's perspective, but if I renovate my kitchen, I might say, oh, it's hopefully good for 20 years. Case in point, our kitchen is from 1985. but you know what I'm getting at. I think every homeowner can relate to that. You kind of invest a lot of money, and the question is, for how long is that good for? So that would be one question. And then my third question would be, cause that's dear to my heart, Green Building Initiative, is that something that was considered? I know Stevenson, I think, I don't know about New Trier, but I know Stevenson for sure has solar panels that in part were, I think, state fund supported. I think there were grants or are still grants. So I think that would be another question of where we are at with that. So thanks.
All good questions. So I'm going to work in reverse order. The sustainability question, it has been a point of discussion. And in fact, the district has done extensive research specifically into solar panels. And there was even some significant student projects that were presented to the Board of Education on the feasibility of investing in solar panels. So I think the district is definitely interested in investigating those. In the 2007 edition, there was a green roof put over a part of that edition, which helps with stormwater management, as well as the permeable paver parking lot that was done at that time as well to also help with stormwater management. So I think the district has a history of looking into sustainable practices and actually implementing those. So I'm very confident that that will be a part of the discussion moving forward. To your second question, how long is this good for? It's a good question. The reality is, what we're finding is trying to plan for that which we do not know at this time. And that's why it's so critical to build in the maximum amount of flexibility you have into the work that you're doing now. Now, as to the finishes are going to go in and out of style. You know, you can look at a particular room or a particular house or a kitchen that's renovated and say, oh, that kitchen was renovated in the 80s. That may go in and out of style, but building in the flexibility of the amount of space that you have, the type of furniture that can be flexible within that space. Aaron had mentioned earlier about the possibility of having movable walls so that they can flex to larger or smaller spaces. That is a critical aspect of anything that we do because we don't know exactly where curriculum is going. But the best we can do is make sure that the space is adaptable to whatever those needs are, as well as the changing of technology over time. 10 years ago, you had been running tons of cabling throughout spaces that were renovated, whereas now a lot more things are going wireless, so there's a lot more adaptability. So everything is kind of moving in that direction, and so the hope is that you're going to make it good as long as possible until there's something that you absolutely have to structurally change within a space. Honestly, I'm struggling to remember what the first question was.
The first question was about vision. So how are we going to take and pivot, if any, based on a post-pandemic world and the things that we were talking about?
Right. Very good. So the master plan largely, as I said, is dealing at a very high level. It's looking at the building as a whole and identifying the arrangement of spaces and the age of spaces and where you want to renovate or reconfigure spaces. The actual implementation of post-pandemic strategies is largely going to happen at the design level, once you get into an actual project. We may identify an HVAC system is in need of replacement because it's beyond its useful life. Once we get into design, then we're going to start talking about the level of the filters, the sensors that want to be in the ductwork, and things of that nature. So it's really not having drastic impacts on the master plan, other than possibly the arrangement of spaces. One comment from our re-engagement with the faculty was to look at the renovation of the nurse's offices and its relationship within the building so that it can handle COVID cases and separation of students and things of that nature. So adding some spaces to the master plan as a result of those discussions is how it's really affecting us at this point in time. The actual details and design of those spaces are going to happen much more in the future.
And then one other thing I would add, Robin, is that one of the changes we're trying to make is having the strategic plan and the master facility plan being living documents to some degree. They weren't. When I came on the board, we were, I think, trapped in a lot of ways just operationally getting by. And the projects that were coming to the board because they were looking at the facility saying, we're going to need to do something, were fixing it when it was broken. So for several years, nobody's fault, it just had gotten put off. And the length of trying to get a project like this done, people just kept saying, oh, we'll do it when we do that. And so there was some disconnect in terms of reality of looking at these things. So everything you mentioned is on the table. It is viewed to really be a strategic plan or an element of it. And I think a lot of Matt's vision, and I think the appeal we saw in bringing him here, was the ability for his creativity and thinking strategically to say, what can we do in terms of shaping the new education of the individuals, and how do we bring them along? Because it's not static, it's going to be ever changing. And I think the utilization of technology and bringing that to bear in terms of the flexibility of the learning and the teachers and the way they can deliver, that was forced upon the teachers in terms of hybrid and in-person and e-learning, all of that very, very quickly, with a lot of success and a lot of opening to say, oh, that's possible. So I think all of that is really in the calculus, and I think within the discussions of what we're having and really just opening up the door to say, what's possible? What could we do? And then understand there will be financial constraints and choices, and we'll make those, but we'll make them together in a way that I think is collaborative and beneficial to everybody.
I would add as well, if you look at the storyboards out in the lobby, there are many great things for us to consider. The conversations and the feedback that we get in the coming months will help us prioritize where we think the greatest need is and how it complements the greatest desire from the community. And then we'll devise a plan that meets those two and hopefully satisfies both groups. So for example, at the end of tonight, I'll just remind you now that there'll be a survey that I would encourage you to fill out, because we're looking for data points to see what's resonating with folks and what isn't, to help us pivot. And we'll also have the survey on our facility master plan webpage. This is the QR code that's behind you. Thank you, Julia. Another thing I'll tell you is that I just finished my previous district before I left an $87 million project. And it included a new build, 2 new builds of a high school and 1 elementary, and we were designing that for a 50-year lifespan. Renovations are less than that. What number is it from 0 to 50? I can't tell you right now, but I will tell you that if we were building a brand new one, I would be expecting it to last 50 years, and we should be designing with that in mind.
Yeah, that's helpful, just to have an idea, really, like a ballpark.
Yeah, and Rick may yell at me later for saying that, but I will tell you that Perkins and Will were also my architects in Ohio, so
you have it on camera.
yeah, we can talk about it later and have that debate. I know we're over time, and there are students that are going to be here ready for tours, and I'm making them wait. I want to give a moment for one more question if there is anyone.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah,
with the survey, I know that you want us to answer the questions that you asked, but can you leave a blank at the end and say, tell us something that you want to tell us so that we could...
It's already in there. So the team is amazing, and they thought of that. So and I am serious when I say this, we are still in the infancy, even though we've been doing this for a long time, and your voices matter. you being here tonight means a great deal to us. So please, the more transparent you are, the better we will be prepared to create a plan that really meets the needs of this community. So one more thank you to the panel, and thank you for all of you being here. The tours are available outside in the lobby if you are interested. We have lots to show you. If you're not able to stay for the tour, that's certainly understandable. Thank you for your patience as we went over time, and remember to take the survey. But with that being said, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evening.